Okay, so we finished assembling our daffodils and now it's time to pot them. Now I'm going to be showing you one of my favorite methods for potting plants of this size. It's definitely not the only way that you can pot plants, but it is one of my favorites. Now technically I already potted my miniature daffodils for the PDF version of the pattern. So I'm just going to show you kind of the basics of how I go about doing that using a different pot and an extra daffodil. Alright, now let's go over the products that I use here. I like to use non-hardening clay. Non-hardening clay, several years down the line it will still be workable. So I can change my arrangement later if I want to. I can rearrange it in the pot if I decide that I don't like the way that I arranged it. I can add more flowers to it. Or I could reuse those flowers in a different arrangement, so I can pull them out of that one and put them in a different one. You can also, although it's not fun, you can remove clay from a pot if you want to use the pot for something else. You can remove the clay. I wouldn't do it unless I absolutely have to, but you can remove it. And then I'm going to top it off with preserved moss. That's just something that I like to use. I think it gives a really nice natural look, more of a garden feel to a potted plant. But you could use something else like little tiny pebbles or any other tiny little like bark or something that you can put in there. You can do that as well. Alright, now I want to make a little note here. It's my personal preference to not work with floral foam. One, I don't like touching it. The texture of it is unpleasant. It kind of skeeves me out a little bit to touch it. But also I find that when you use it by itself, it doesn't really hold flowers all that well. Everything that I've potted in floral foam ends up where the flowers just kind of wiggle around a little bit. And so it's not my preference to work with floral foam. But I'll show you a way that you can use it mixed with the clay in just a minute. Alright, now working with non-hardening clay, I like to break it into little pieces, because that's a little bit easier to work with smaller pieces at a time. Now the clay, sometimes it starts out a little bit hard, and the more you work with it, the softer it gets. So it does take a little bit of working with it to be able to mold it into your pot. So you just put it in your pot, and I do try and mold it to the shape of my pot. Sometimes it'll kind of stick to the edge of your pot, and if you can do that, do it. So kind of push it into the sides of your pot, mold it around nicely. Now the reason I mold it to the shape of my pot instead of just shoving a block in there is so that it doesn't move around or wiggle around inside my pot, because that'll make my flowers wiggle around too. So we want to eliminate any gaps between the pot and the clay. And I'm going to fill it up to about 1/2 inch to 1 inch below the rim of my pot, because I want space above my clay for all of my moss. Also, another note here, clay gets all over your fingertips, so try not to touch your workspace, or if you can, try to just use a couple fingers to work with the clay. That way you can still touch your pot without getting clay all over your pot. Alright, so I've got my pot filled with clay up to about 1/2 inch to 1 inch below the rim. Now I want to kind of show how I insert this stem into the pot, because I've got this beaded stem here, and I don't want to put any pressure on that beaded stem. So I'm going to grab just underneath the flower stem, on this stem up here that isn't beaded. And then I'm going to hold down at the bottom, right at the bottom of the leaves. And then I'm going to put most of the pressure on this top hand up here. I don't really want to mess up any of my beadwork, so I'm just putting very light pressure on my right hand here. And then I'm going to push down. I'm going to go slow. I don't need to be in a rush. And I'm just going to keep pushing until I reach the bottom of the pot. Alright, now one thing I didn't mention here is that I did cut my stem to be a little bit less than the depth of my pot. That's just going to help make sure that my uncovered stem is going to be covered with all of the topping that we put on. Okay, so let's quickly go over how I arranged mine and my finished arrangement here. Now the pot I chose has a high back to it, and so I figured that it would be best to do an arrangement that kind of faces forward instead of doing one that goes all the way around where flowers are facing every direction. So my main viewing angle is going to be from the front. I'm going to be looking at it from this side and then maybe from the sides as well. So I chose to arrange my plants so that I have my tallest ones in the back and then the medium ones on the sides and then the shorter ones in the front. That's just going to make sure that I see all of my flowers. Technically, when they grow outside or in a pot, you might have some shorter ones in the back and some taller ones in the front, and you can do that if you want to. This is just how I chose to arrange mine. All right, now once you have all of your plants inside, that's when you're going to take your topping and fill it in between the plants. Now you can, I'm pretty sure I mentioned before, you can use something like pebbles instead if you want to. But this moss you would have to break pieces off, and it is a bit messy. You're going to have to clean up afterwards, but just little pieces here and there and stuff it between your plants and all around to make sure you cover all of the clay. Okay, there's one last thing that I want to throw out at you guys as an idea for potting these plants. Now, personally, I don't like working with the floral foam, but clay can get expensive, especially if you are working with a large arrangement and you have to fill the entire pot with clay. It can get really expensive. So what I do in that case is I use half foam. I'll fill the bottom of my pot with foam and then layer clay on top of it. That way you get the hold of the clay at the top to hold those flowers still, but you're using less clay. So that is an option for you guys there. For this particular plant, I would probably do no more than half foam and then half clay on top. If you were working with a smaller or lighter weight plant, you can fill it with more foam and then just a thin layer of clay on the top. I've done that several times with really small flowers, and it worked really well. Okay, so have fun potting your plants, and I hope you guys will send me pictures of your finished arrangements. I would love to see them.